I am the pretty thing that lives in the house. This is a title of a new supernatural mystery film for Netflix. This was specifically made for Netflix. Now, this one is directed by Osgood Perkins. Now, Perkins is actually the son of Anthony Perkins, of course, from the famous movie Psycho. And he's made another film that I reviewed here recently called February, and it's a very similar film in style, basically, in regards to the kind of the way the plot moves and the kind of the ambiguousness of it. Now, this one stars Ruth Wilson. I'm most familiar with Ruth Wilson as her work in Luther, the TV show here in the UK, where she plays serial killer Alice opposite Idris Elba. And in this movie, she basically plays a live-in nurse to an elderly novelist who is kind of, going towards the end of her day, shall we say. She's, quite wealthy in this kind of large house, etc. So she's basically living in, kind of looking after her and kind of running the house. But it appears there may be a supernatural presence in this house also. And as the film progresses, obviously we kind of peel back the layers and find out more about it. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say on this movie. I feel this film will be particularly divisive because on one hand, I feel it has a great artistic merit, but on the other hand, it is incredibly slow and somewhat tedious. So let's talk about the positives first of all. Like I said, Perkins definitely has a particular style here. I've heard him be compared to David Lynch, and he's definitely somewhat of a surreal filmmaker. So don't be expecting things to be kind of spoon-fed to you. I think a lot of this is kind of left up to your own sort of imagination, and kind of you have to put the pieces together to a certain degree at least. And I feel that's a positive and a detriment at the same time. The look here, I feel, is its strongest component. I've seen this been referred to as poetry on film, and I can see why there are people would say it's certainly a very ethereal film. Some of the kind of the more supernatural scenes, and I want to stress this. Although I'm classing this in my horror movie section, it really isn't a horror movie. It is a supernatural film, but there's very little scare. There's maybe one jump scare, but there are some kind of eerie moments, and there are some great use of the camera work here, and the kind of the ambience that this kind of like this film projects to give you a kind of a real sort of ghostly sort of an ethereal sense of this film. So that was very good. So I feel the artistic direction at least is particularly good, and it is somewhat of an intriguing setup here, I have to say. But the story here is very subtle. It really doesn't kind of like give you too much in the way of obvious plot threads. I feel you really have to kind of pay attention to what's going on. So I feel if you are watching this kind of while looking at your phone and things like that, you'll kind of lose where the story is going. But I've got to say, on the negative side here, it is incredibly slow film. I mean, I kind of like slow burns sometimes, but man, this one is really slow. And there's very little dialogue in this movie as well. I mean, the probably the most dialogue we get is actually kind of more of a narration than anything. But there's very few scenes where you have people interacting, to be honest with you. So I feel it becomes a little bit boring sometimes, to be quite honest with you, because you're missing that kind of that human interaction. There are a few scenes where we have people talking on the phone and stuff, but there's not much in the way of actually personal communication between one and more characters, so to speak. Like I said, the main issue for me, I feel this film is going to be quite dull for some people. Because it's not so obvious, I feel that if you are not really paying full attention, then you're going to kind of just think, I don't really know what's going on here. It just seems to be this kind of woman slowly doing stuff around the house, and that's pretty much on the surface of kind of what it can look like, I feel. If you peel back the layers, I think you're going to find there'll be more here for a certain audience. And I've heard this film referred to as poetry, and it certainly is, to a certain degree, very beautiful to look at. And I feel that there is definitely that kind of that mysterious and kind of ghostly feel to it. But on the other hand, it really is a very slow film, and to be quite honest, not all that much happens. Personally, I have to say, I did find it kind of boring. I think the initial setup was very interesting here, and I've got to say, I wasn't a huge fan of Ruth Wilson in this role. I loved her in Luther, but I've got to say, I feel she was a little weak in this role. So overall, I've got to say, I'd pretty much give this film right down the middle, 5 out of 10. I feel if you are a David Lynch fan and that kind of thing, then there may be certain things that you'll kind of like here. Certainly if you like kind of more of a visually artistic film. But on the other hand, if you're wanting a film like The Conjuring or something like that, basically, or Sinister, that sort of film, this film isn't for you. It's not a horror film, really. It is a kind of a ghostly tale. It reminds me a little bit of the movie Lady in White, which is an older sort of supernatural film. And like that one, isn't really a horror film, although it does deal with ghosts. This is a kind of a similar film to that, to a certain degree. I actually quite like Lady in White, but this one I found was a little bit too slow for its own good. And lacked a little bit in, I feel, a bit of dialogue, to be honest. So there you go. So overall, I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.